I don't go beyond my victim story to no story. I go beyond my victim story. I then access the field of true self. Meaning's there. It's a field of meaning. So discover your story. Discover your destiny. But that means that to be enlightened, to get the story right. That I step into my unique self story. And then I realize that my story is part of a larger story of evolution. And now let's bring all that together. Now, when I'm now in relationship to reality, when I'm in a conversation, I gotta get the story straight. Enlightenment means the most accurate and honest and deepest view of what actually the storyline is. The nature of the infinite intimate. We call God the infinite intimate because she lives my story with me. That's unique self. That's evolutionary unique self. But we have to be willing to get the story straight. Great, great, great to be here. What a beautiful, when I say what a beautiful, okay, so stay with me for seconds, okay, everyone? And maybe we could just talk this week about those first three words, what a beautiful, right? When we say what a beautiful, so I can literally hear, like in my body, I just felt in my body, I just stopped. Because, okay, he's going to say what a beautiful, okay, let's get on with the real stuff. So my response to that is, fuck you. Yeah, right? It's so beautiful, right? Like Krista took us inside, right? And opened the space. And her voice was different than it was any other week that it ever was, right? And then Christina took us into this Dharma recapitulation. And we're going to hear the resonance of the code for David. And right, and Krista spent her whole life in order to be able to take us into this one mountain with that voice and that intention and that quality. And then Christina Amlon stepped in and she spent the last 2 days like weaving exactly, taking exact quotes, reweaving them in the right order in order to create this moment. And it's unlike any Dharma recap that ever was. And it's beautiful and precise. And I just remarked to Kathy as Christina Amlon was reading, I said, so beautiful, right? Like this new story that we're telling is so wildly, insanely beautiful and so wildly, insanely important and so desperately needed. It's so desperately needed that without it, I don't actually think we have a feature, right? In other words, without a new story of value in this moment of meta crisis, in this time between worlds and time between stories, the system itself collapses. Like, right? So when I say so beautiful, and I literally felt in my body, I felt like everyone kind of tune out, so beautiful. No, stop. Forget about everything we say, friends, Romans, countrymen, right? Lend me your ears. So in this moment, right, we are telling this new story. We're ecstatic to be telling the new story. We feel the urgency of the moment and we feel the newness of the moment, right? And so when we come to one mountain, we're surprised, right? One mountain, many paths, but we're coming to the mountain. This is the mountain. We're coming to the mountain together. We're a unique self symphony coming to the mountain, and which means we want to experience revelation, but not revelation of a, imposed structure by someone trying to kind of declare something for the sake of, inflating themselves and dominating, right? Not that. No, we want to declare the new story that lives in us, that we recognize its truth. We want to weave together the different strands, the different parts that all already participate in this larger omnicoherent story. We want to weave that story together and tell that story so every man, woman, and child across the face of the planet and in the emergent surrounding planets in the galactic world can actually participate in the story. So we have a shared story. Because if we don't have a shared story, we're not at home. We're not at home with each other. We're not welcome in the cosmos, and we can't welcome each other. And then in a world which is fundamentally not local, right? The world's fundamentally global. It's one world, right? The interior scientists knew that. We now just know it topographically. Viruses spread around the world in a second. If we don't have a story, which is a context for our diversity, a world religion as a context for our diversity, right? What is religion in the moment of the meta crisis? Religion is a story. We don't have a shared story of value, not as a dominating function, but as a context for our diversity. We polarize. We don't just polarize, oh, we have a hard time talking to each other. We collapse. We collapse in meta crisis. Polarization actually disallows the conversation necessary to avoid the 7 core vectors of existential risk. Hello. Hey, hello. I know he's annoying. I know he keeps reminding us of that. He annoys me too, this guy, the black shirt. I got you. He's annoying. But in order to do this new story of value, we got to be surprised. So when I listen, I come into One Mountain every week and I hear Krista starting to sing and I see Shahati before and Jamie and Suzette's right. And Jacqueline, who's in Australia, who kind of gets up at 4 a.m. to join us even as she's walking through her journey, right? And Benjamin, right? And Arieli and Christina and David, right? Right, all of us, right? Right, all of us, right? Krista, right? It's like I'm surprised. And every time I come to One Mountain, I'm surprised. So the beginning, we're in a new year. What a new year means is it's new. The word year, shana, year, means beauty, shein, right? In Yiddish, which is a combination of German and Hebrew, right? You say, Azer sheina medel. What a beautiful person, right? And it's like, shein is beauty. And beauty comes from the word shana, like Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year, the new year, right? Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year. We're in the week of New Year's. So the new year is there's a new beauty. And the new beauty comes from the groundedness of it, embracing all of the past. So Shana, the word Shana, year means shinun, the repetition of. Right? And Lena, this would be an example of seeing how this appears in different languages, what you and I talked about a couple of days ago. Right? So Shana, year means shinun. You repeat, and shinui, radically new. So radically new means I'm surprised. Right? And when I'm surprised, I'm filled with joy. Right? I'm surprised. So I've got to both be able to be surprised by that which I already know. Men listening, be surprised by the pair of breasts that live with you in the same bed. And you don't have to look for 6 versions of the next one. Be surprised, right? You don't need a pseudo-eros novelty, right? Which is, let me see something new instead of seeing with new eyes, right? To see with new eyes, the same place, the same person, is to be surprised. That's the first part of being surprised. The first part of being surprised is, we're here. And so when I start saying it's beautiful, right, we don't turn off, we're saying the beautiful thing. Let's see if he says something new this week. That's why I said, fuck you too. I apologize for that, Oriana. Apologies. Won't say that again. Okay. Ari and I have a little agreement about language in One Mountain, which I try and keep most of the time. So I'm saying like we're surprised to be here. We're surprised to be here just doing, we're in our pattern, we're steady. And then the word Shana, the same word Shana means radically new. We're going to do something radically original, something that never happened before. This day's an emergent. This day never existed before. This day never, right? The nature of time is that time is, the word time literally zman in the original Hebrew means invitation. And time is an invitation to radical newness. Because time is pregnant with possibility that never existed and that can birth, right, something that's original that never existed before. So when I come to One Mountain, when we come to One Mountain together, we're like, wow, we see with new eyes. And then, with those new eyes, we see that which is actually completely new and wild. And what we do every week is what we're here to do together is we're here to be in the depth of our own intimate space. And from that intimate space, tell the new story of value, but not a made up story, not a fairy tale, not a conjecture. We want to weave together, and anyone who wants to come on, I'll be quiet and you finish the next sentence. We all know the next sentence. We want to weave together, chat box, I'll see in the chat box. Anyone want to do it with me? We want to weave together the validated insights from the leading edge systems of gnosis, from the traditional world, pre-modern, the modern world and the postmodern world. We want to weave them together into a new story of value greater than the sum of the parts that actually is our orienting North Star. It's our compass of joy, right? It actually allows us to create policy. You can't create economic policy or governance policy or personal decisions without creating that from within the context of the story in which I live. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay. Wow. So I just want to just my particular feeling, if I can permission, I'm just crazy happy to be here with you. And I feel happy. Like my experience is joy. I'm also privileged. What a privilege, right? Just what a insane privilege, an insane privilege. Okay. But first, let's just look at ourselves for just a second more, in time a little bit. Okay. Let's look at ourselves in time. So we are between, we said we're after Christmas, in Hanukkah, before New Year's, which is a little complicated. So I did want to share with you, y'all, do you remember that Jewish man, right, who went to the rabbi, right? And he says, Rabbi, I've got to share with you this terrible thing happened, right? The rabbi says, what right? What happened? He said, Rabbi, like my son, he left the faith. He went and became a Christian. There's obviously a Jewish perspective on this story. He says he went and became a Christian. And the rabbi says, oh, Gewalt Hashanda, it's terrible. It's terrible. I'm so sorry. But then the rabbi calls him close. He says, I got to tell you, the rabbi says to the man, he says, the same thing happened to me. My son left the faith and he became a Christian. So now they're both devastated together, of course, right? And they don't know what to do. The rabbi says, you know what? Let's pray. Let's pray. So they turn to God and they start praying. And lo and behold, they hear a voice come out from heaven. It's the voice of God. And the voice says, shh, you won't believe it. My son did the same thing. That was funny. Okay. Okay. We got to look at the chat box for kind of chat box laughter, right? It's hard to tell a joke into the virtual world. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for the chat box laughter. I appreciate that. Okay. I don't write this stuff. I just, they give me a piece of paper. I just read it. Okay. So here's our topic. Are we ready? Here we go. Are we ready? Are we ready? Here we go. Original, new, old, together, right? The ancient and the utterly evolutionary actually come together as one. Opposites are joined at the hip. So I want to, with your permission, turn to David. David's going to read us a code, and we're going to go deep into a new world. Okay, just crazy exciting. It's going to be, I think, insanely relevant. I want to give two, I hope, insanely relevant examples to our most intimate personal lives. And also think about it in terms of the new story, in terms of the meta crisis, in terms of governance, in terms of how we create a world together. So they're both. Because remember, one of the core principles of this new story of value that we're telling in this religious, spiritual, secular moment in response to the meta crisis, one of the principles is there's no split between the personal and the cosmic. Did everyone get that sentence? Right? They got it late 60s, right? The personal is political. Good. Right? My sexing is not just my sexing. My sexing is a political act. That was a big realization. That was a big evolution of consciousness. It's not just personal. It's like there's this stepping into this wider field. But actually, the personal is not just political. The personal is cosmic. No detail of my life that is alienated from cosmic magnificence allows me to feel welcome in the universe. You get that? It's like a big sentence. There's any detail of my life that's disconnected from cosmic magnificence does not allow my mind and heart ease. I can't rest. So David, take us away, brother. In we go.
I'm here, in my family of origin house back from for the holidays in my childhood room. And so this is a place where like all the old stories of my life converge with what are we doing now? And, people are changing the holiday customs and traditions. And so there's this question in our house of what's valuable? What do we have to preserve when we change these customs and change these traditions? Right. And so I'm just thinking about that in terms of the code this week about value and story and what do we do with it? So here's this week's evolutionary love code. The battle between good and evil, between value and anti-value, is real. But the universe tilts toward value. In the end, value and anti-value are joined at the hip in the mystery of the evolution of love. Story is a first principle and first value of cosmos. Story is challenged by anti-story. Ultimately, story and anti-story are opposites joined at the hip, part of the same plot line, the plot line of the universe, a love story. In the ultimate realization, we realize that life is about moving beyond my story in order to live my story. The ultimate categorical imperative is live your story. And with that, I turn my word back to you, beloved Dr. Mark.
It's great to be with everyone. Okay, you ready to go? Here we go. Okay. One of the things that we're going to talk about in the new year is what I'm going to call, and we've called for the last few years, value and anti-value. Value and anti-value. Huh. So, Lord of the Rings, Gandalf, Aragorn, and Arwen, Frodo and Sam from the Shire, right? The hobbits. Value. They have an intuitive, embodied incarnation of value. Sauron, it's Sauron, anti-value. Does that make sense, everyone? Stay close. The gaze of the infinite intimate, meaning what was called in the lineages hashgacha, right? Based on a verse in the Song of Solomon, mashkiach minacharakim, right? I'm watching over you, right? I'm watching over you. I don't know how many people had babies in this incarnation, and sometimes you have a baby's incarnation, sometimes you have a non-baby's incarnation. And by the way, in the great lineages, sometimes the babies are physical, an actual baby. Sometimes the babies are literally the lineage sources of the lineage of Solomon talk about quite literally. Sometimes the babies are books. You birth books, or you birth, right, communities, right? So, but if you're doing in this incarnation the physical babies thing, right? So, you know the feeling of just kind of you're always checking in. How's the baby, right? When we're in love, we're always watching. We're glancing over, right? And there's a gaze of love, right? The gaze of love is the gaze of attention, of loving attention. Attention, placing of attention is the gaze of value, right? The placing of attention that, let's stay close, the placing of attention that brackets the self and is in mad devotion to the emergence of the beloved. Does everyone get that sense? That's what love is. I was talking to my friend D yesterday, we'll just call him D, or Daniel, and we were doing a Holy of Holies, and you know, my dear D said, like, okay, like, wow, I really know what love is. So I said, okay, what is it? We're like, so we're like, what is love? So I offered D this definition, right? Love is when I bracket self and I see you, that seeing you so arouses me that I cannot not but be in service to you. Isn't that beautiful? So that's the gaze, that's attention. That's the gaze of love, that's value. Surveillance that's designed to control you and manipulate you and undermine your free will and extract, digital exhaust of your patterns on the web for the sake of a third party that's misaligned with the true and inherent desires of your life. That's anti-value. You get that? So providence, that's what the great religions called it, providence. The sense that there's a personhood in cosmos, which is an infinite personhood. We call that the infinite intimate. The name of God is the infinite intimate. All of the infinity of third person sciences disclosed, all the 100 billion galaxies, all black holes included, dark matter included, right? And all of that infinite intimate that's actually looking at you and saying, oh my God, I see you. I love you madly. And I see you personally. And I address you personally. I'm calling your name. I'm calling your name. I'm calling your name. Abraham hears a voice calling, Abraham, yo, right? Yo. So that is this infinite intimate calling Abraham's name. I see you. So that's the gaze of attention. Infinity places for attention. And then, as Haley recapitulated so beautifully, right, attention liberates from loneliness. Surveillance, right, for the sake of creating a planetary enclosure, which is an anti-temple, temple value, planetary enclosure, planetary stack that encloses you so that actually your very humanity is undermined by invisible controllers that you can't see. And we actually upgrade the algorithms and downgrade the human beings, anti-value. Right? Does that make sense, everyone? So there's value and there's anti-value. Now stay close. Okay, this is for Elena. So and for Andrew Sweeney, right? So there's a tree of life, right, in the lineage. The tree of life, which actually defines the Renaissance, right? The Florentine Platonic Academy that I've discussed with y'all many times, founded by Cosimo de' Medici. In the Renaissance that told the new story of modernity, literally rooted itself in the tree of life. Okay, I want to talk about this tree of life in a second. I just want to do, commercial, sorry. We're getting interrupted by a commercial. I can hear Krista sending me a note. Mark, I asked you to talk about it. It's really important. She's absolutely right. And I know that you and Kathy talked about it. So this is a commercial. This is a Cosimo de' Medici commercial. Okay, two things. We have two things that we want to do in the next 10 days. One is we have 40 books of oral essays we're publishing this year. Oh my God. Krista, like, oh my God, right? Everybody, oh my God. We want to hire a proofreader for the last stage. 40 books, $300. 300 times 40, $12,000. So we need $12,000 to do that, number one. Number two, we want to hire for a 6-month period a marketing person for $12,000 to build one mountain, really invite more people. Those are the two things we're doing, 12,000 and 12,000. So now you don't have to be Cosimo de' Medici, but we actually need that 24,000. If you can step up and actually write that check or write part of that check or double that check, that'd be completely awesome. But seriously, friends, Romans, and countrymen, right? That is hugely important for what we're doing. We're literally at the end of the year, tax moment, etc. Right? So please, that we want to action the next 3-4 days. If you can step in and actually take your seat at the table, that way you will make an enormous difference. And commercial, but a critical commercial. Okay. We're back to the Renaissance, Cosimo de' Medici. Everyone got the thread? We together? We together, everybody? Cosimo de' Medici, who starts the Florentine Platonic Academy, right, with Marcello Ficinio and Da Vinci and Pico della Mirandola. So they all study the tree of life. The tree of life has 10 sephirot, 10, now stay close. The sephirot is usually translated as illuminations, and the word saphir as in sapphire. It's a particular quality of mystical illumination, which appears in a mystical division as blue. Actually appears as blue. Actually Muktananda from the Siddha Yoga lineage describes the experience of blue light. Very particular experience, right? It's a very particular, so the tree of life it's the infinite experience of the intimate divine in my personal life that appears in 10 qualities of blue light. That's one translation of the 10 sephirot, the 10 illuminations, which are this tree of life, which is essentially a map of reality. It's a map of public reality, a map of scientific reality. It's a map of personal reality. It's a map of intimate reality. It's a map of human reality. This is the kind of the great Renaissance map of reality. Now, each one of another way to translate Sphira is, as we talked about in our Parallax kind of conversation about this, which did for about 10 weeks, right, with Andrew Sweeney, another way to translate Sphira is story, but it's really story of value. So there's 10 divine stories of value. Go really slow now, really slow. Don't think, oh, I know that. It's really slow. 10 divine stories of value that live in us. Now, at the same time, there are 10 anti-stories of value. Is that wild? So just like there are Eser Sfirot de Kedusha, there are the 10 stories, or the 10 Sefirot, the 10 illuminations, the 10 values, or the 10 stories of value. There are actually 10 stories of anti-value. Right? And in Holy of Holies now with Zach, right, as we're talking, and in David J. Temple land, and with beloved my friend Aubrey, right, and with Topher, right, in those three tracks, we're talking a lot about value and anti-value. And I'm trying to share this teaching that's been percolating for a couple of decades, that there's actually 10 value and 10 anti-value. And actually, you ready to stay close? Who wants to get like crazy for a second? Let's get crazy. In the Book of Radiance of the Zohar, in the second volume, there's actually a description in very obtuse Aramaic passage of the quality of each one of the anti-value Sefirot. So the Zohar actually describes an anti-tree of life. And it actually appears in 5 or 6 places in the Zohar, different passages. This Book of Radiance that defines the medieval period that then enters into the Renaissance, right? So there's the tree of life, which is the map of value. Then there's the tree of life, the tree of anti-value. And Solomon, in the Solomon lineage, Solomon already describes this, and he calls it Zel Umat Zebra Elohim. This, as opposed to this, did the divine create. This value, L'umat zeh, as opposed to this anti-value, bara Elohim is the quality of the structure of reality. And as I was studying this with Aubrey a couple of years ago, we were talking about it in terms of self. And Aubrey got very excited about it. He says, okay, so you could talk about this value, anti-value thing you're talking about, Mark. You could talk about this in terms of self as, and he coined a new way of saying it, which I loved, which is you and anti-you. There's you and anti-you, right? And again, by the way, there's nothing that makes a teacher happier than when an initiate says something new in a new way that they didn't think of. It's a beautiful way to say it. Like, Aubrey, go brother. Beautiful way to say it. There's you and anti-you. And he's actually spent the last year and a half writing a book on this you and anti-you quality, which will be part of the great library. How cool is that? Right? It's beautiful. There's you and anti-you. But it's an application of this basic idea of value and anti-value. Now it gets crazy. Okay? Now, if we were doing just kind of pop music here, I would have skipped all this. But we're not doing. We're trying to actually write this new story together. Here we go. So it gets even crazier. It gets like really crazy now and really beautiful. So just like there's an individual anti-value structure, which opposes every value. So let me give you an example, okay? And what we'll actually do is after the new year, we'll go through all 10 in one mountain. We'll actually go through all 10, okay? But it's not just that there's individual value and anti-value. So for example, let's say that the highest Sephirah, the highest illumination is Keter, Keter, which we talked about in our series on the Tree of Life. So Keter is, as we explained, and I'm not going to go into it now at all. So if you weren't there, if you don't track this, don't worry. But for those of you who were there, but if not, you can just pick up the word. Keter represents what I would call the story of silence. Silence. So imagine the most beautiful silence you've ever been in, Keter. That's the valley. It's this beautiful silence that doesn't need words. Right? It's a silence of presence. But then the anti-value would be when a person goes silent and they desperately need to speak up. When a person's voice is crushed. When a person becomes, for example, in the concentration camps, you had people who became what are called mules, mules, mules. They lost their capacity to speak. They didn't just lose voice for a moment. They just lost voice. They can never speak again because they were so shattered that voice was destroyed. So that would be anti-value, right? That would be a silence of utter absence, right? They're both silent. One's value, the other's anti-value. Does that make sense? Okay, so each one of these 10, there's a value, there's an anti-value. Okay, so now it gets beautiful. I mean, it's all beautiful, but now we're going to go like big leap now. Okay, ready? Do we have a drum roll around the world? Let's drum roll. Okay, drum roll, drum roll, drum roll. Okay, so now, just like there's an individual anti-value for every one of the 10 illuminations or the 10 stories of value, there's an anti-story of value for each one of the 10. There's also story and anti-story. Isn't that beautiful? And its story itself has story and anti-story, right? So there's story because story itself, sephirah, this illumination, sapir, is also the same Hebrew root for story. And story is the same Hebrew root, sipur, S-I-P-P-U-R, is the same Hebrew root as mispar, number. And a number is a cipher, C-I-P-H-E-R. Lainey, you notice we just dumped languages, right? Cipher, it's a cipher. And cipher sounds like sipur, story, because number and story are intimately intertwisted and inter-indicated and inter-included and interdigitated, right? You can't split number and story. And just like, you even have materialist mathematicians, but then when they talk about numbers, they talk about numbers as Platonic forms, meaning numbers are intrinsic value structures of cosmos, because cosmos is coded with value. Value is not just made up, it's coded with value. And just like you have a number, which is a mathematics of cosmos, you have a mathematics of story. Stories, each story is a value itself. It's a story of value, which is like the number, a Platonic structure of cosmos. It means value is real. So silence is not an accident. Silence is not just, we didn't get to speak. Silence is a quality of cosmos. And so too for all of the 10 qualities of value. And story itself is a quality of cosmos. And that story itself is a first principle and first value of cosmos. Good? And just like there's this first principle and first value of story, there's also what we might call anti-story, right? There's anti-story, right? And what's anti-story? So anti-story is that which destroys, right? Destories. To destroy is to destory. That's what it is, right? Destruction is a destory. Like, So it's an anti-story, right? It's an anti-story. So I want to try and get this straight, okay? So it's kind of like this. Y'all have noticed, that I've spent some time kind of critiquing. We have together Yuval Harari. This past 3-4 months, he put out a new book called Nexus. Right? He's an Israeli populist historian, put out a new book called Nexus. And so we did, we did a lot. I spent actually a lot of time these last 3 months critiquing Harari. And actually there's going to be a little documentary film, kind of like a running kind of film, something like that comes out next Sunday, which Aubrey and I did. I did with Aubrey Marcus, which is like a 2.5 hour kind of critique of Harari. So we took some of this material and put it together. And Eli, who's joining us, we'll talk about Eli next week and the week after. Eli is going to be making a part 2 of the movie, right? So why am I so freaking annoyed with Mr. Harari, right? So he didn't like divorce my sister, right? Didn't do anything to my mother, right? He's I'm sure a completely lovely man, right? So it's not personal. But what he did is he violated the canon of story. And he did it in several ways. I'm just going to tell you one right now, because I'm not going to repeat that. That's a whole vector of material. It's really important. But this dude who sells 50 million books, his most popular book, right, is Sapiens. Right? His most popular book is Sapiens. And Sapiens is a story. That's why people liked it. It's a story. It's the story of human history. But it's actually a false story. And a false story means you put together the pieces in a way to draw a certain conclusion, right, which actually is deceptive. And what a historian can do is they can pretend to be, and they might be pretending even unconsciously to themselves, right? It's not necessarily a deliberate act of deceit, although sometimes it is deliberate doublespeak. And we talked about that in our discussion. And our discussion is not about Yuval. It's not about the dude Yuval. It's about Yuval being an unconscious parrot of the zeitgeist. Yuval's not forming the zeitgeist. He's an unconscious, popular parrot of the zeitgeist. So when Yuval tells the story of Homo sapiens, he's basically putting together the story as a materialist story in which, quote, any meaning you would ascribe to your life is a delusion. No stories are real. No value is real. And therefore, history is driven solely by interests of different kinds. But history can't be driven by value that's real. At best, it can be driven by value that's made up, meaning by fiction. And Yuval actually writes, stay close to me, a storybook for children. I'm not making this up. He writes a storybook for children. Bedtime Stories with Yuval, which is to tell children this story. So he gets that stories matter. And his basic premise is reality is run by stories that are fiction, because they can't be stories of value that are real. So therefore, what he does is he tells a story. Everyone tracking this? His book, Sapiens, is him telling a story, which is, I think, an absolutely false story. Right? And now you want to say, why am I outraged by it? So imagine, now stay close, friends, imagine that you're in, I don't know, how many people on this thread have ever gotten divorced? Let's do the divorce thing. Okay. Me, I've done that. Okay. How many people have ever gotten divorced? Anybody? Okay. The people haven't gotten married. You can't you got someone who's right. Divorce. Okay. A few people been there. Okay. If you got a bunch of divorced people. Okay. Good. Got you. Okay. So now this is a little divorce. We're gonna have a little divorce club here. Okay. Exclusive club, as someone said to me once recently. Okay. So did you ever have this moment, okay, where you're having this argument with your former partner and they just say something which just completely violates what you actually know happened and you just makes you crazy? Who's had that moment? Anybody? And right? It's and it doesn't matter whether you're getting divorced from the community you were in, where somehow the story gets retold and you're like, really? Really? And now stay with me, it's going to get even more dramatic. And it's not just multiple perspectives. You get me? It's not just, oh, right, they've got their perspective and I've got mine. And why am I stuck in mine? No, actually, what they just said was a violation of story. And it doesn't matter whether it was their lawyer who told them to change the locks and distort the story slightly, but you're outraged because the story's not true. It didn't happen that way. And it's not just that I'm stuck in my perspective. That's just not right. It's putting together the pieces in a way and it makes you crazy, right? Now, what we need to do is we need to be able to leave a relationship in great love, just like we enter a relationship in great love. So just like we should only enter a relationship when we're soulmates, we have a shared vision of reality. If we just enter a relationship because we want to have kids together, or let's put the money together, that's roommate. We have a roommate relationship to marriage, won't work. Soulmate, we share our wounds. Beautiful, but insufficient. You shouldn't actually partner with someone. You don't have a shared story. So we need to enter a relationship animated by a shared story of we share our stories with each other. Number one, when I'm married, we share our stories with each other. There's always what I call date 7. Date 7 is when you share all those stories you never share with anyone else. Yeah, I killed the cat. And I dumped whatever it is, right? But then you need more than just a shared soulmate story. You need a shared story of reality. We have a shared vision of reality. And if you live with someone for 30, 40 years, as much as you love them, and you can't get on the same page of a shared story, it's painful, right? And it's almost a pain you can't speak because reality doesn't take stories seriously now. So you can't actually share the pain of like not being on the same page with the same story. Because everyone's like, what's the problem? Right? So he's a materialist and I'm not. Who cares? Well, no, it's very painful not to be living in the same story. Now, the story can allow for much diversity, but we need a shared story. So in the same way, when I leave a marriage, we need to actually come together, bow to each other, thank each other for the exchange of gifts, right? Collect the beauty of the story. See the places where we actually deeply diverge, we disagree. That's why we're getting divorced. And we actually disagree about how to understand and how to move, but we actually can gather a shared story of what happened. And if we can gather a shared story of what happened, even in the places that we disagree, we can actually hold the shared story, then we can love each other on the other side. Does that make sense? Right? Love comes from shared story. Intimacy comes from shared story. There's no intimacy without shared story. It has to be a shared story of value. Like, right? So it begins to get really beautiful. So that's why I got so mad at Yuval. I got mad at Yuval because I know the history. And he told a story. It wasn't just different perspectives. Lots of it, right? That's one way to tell a very, very limited story. And it leaves out so much information. So imagine, so I'm going to can I tell you guys a story for a second? And I don't have for a story. Tell you a story. Is that okay? So there was a dude. I don't know if I should call him a dude. Those of you who know him, I don't know if dude applies to him, but it might. Sean. You guys remember Sean Raymer? So I just texted with Sean and Victoria a couple of days ago on Christmas Eve. So Sean spent a lot of his life in the pharmaceutical industry. He's a Mennonite, as is Victoria. They're great people. They've been with us for many, many years. And at some point, when Harari writes his book, Homo Sapiens, I hadn't heard of it. It's like 2013, 14. Sean sends me the book. He says, you should read this. This is like, read it. So I read it. I was like massively disturbed by it. I read it quickly. And I said to Sean, he's lying. The story's not true. It's not Homo Sapiens, it's Homo Amor. That's where Homo Amor came from. Meaning you can more accurately tell the story of the cosmos as a love story. Not because, Terry, stay with me, not because I decided which story to tell and all stories are the same, AKA Lifespring or Landmark. No, because it's a more accurate story. It's a more accurate story of reality. When I don't tell that story accurately, I'm not telling the truth. So for example, so you have an example. Yuval opens his book, Sapiens, with one paragraph about the world of matter, subatomic and atomic and molecular world. Then another paragraph about biology, 3 lines. Then he starts, now the story of reality starts, the cognitive revolution. And Kathy, we did that in Holy of Holies like 3 years ago. But 1 second, what happened to biology is not neutral. Biology is coded with value. Biology is a story, and we'll talk about that not this week. But actually, there's a core structure of story. There's actually 6 elements to story that exist in every story that begin at the subatomic world, and then story evolves. That was a big 2 sentences. I know I didn't explain it. We'll come back to it a different week, maybe next week. But it's like, so he put together the story in the wrong way. So what if you told that same story? You tell the story from the perspective of groups of people that got together and formed communities in which they loved each other. What if we told the story of this moving towards ever deeper movement from the individual to communion, right? Deeper and deeper and wider intimacies, right? And then intense groups of people that wanted to be intimate, not only with each other, with their neighbors, the Dunbar number, 150 people, but they wanted to create a larger intimacy based on an intimacy with the field of value itself. So they told stories of value where they became intimate. So read the Beatitudes, right? Excuse me, in the New Testament, the Sermon on the Mount, it's various visions. The Sermon on the Mount is not just a fictional story, and not just a figment of our imagination. The recent Christians around the world, despite all the corruptions of Christianity, there are many, but they gather around the Sermon on the Mount because that's a shared story of value, and we feel that story of value alive in my body, and we recognize that story of value, and therefore we recognize each other as we're mutually recognizing the story. We become intimate with each other through the shared story of value, right? So imagine that you tell the story, the history of humanity, as not truncated from the history We're not alienated. We're not unwelcome in Cosmos. We're not an accident in Cosmos. We're not a virus in Cosmos. All language that's used all the time. We're actually welcome in Cosmos, and our story emerges from, which of course it does from an evolutionary science perspective, from the story of the subatomic molecular world into the world of the biosphere, and then into the human world. There's an evolution of story, an evolution of value, which of course there's radical continuity and there's radical discontinuity. There's momentous leaps. There's punctuated equilibria. And I don't mean punctuated equilibria for those of you who are evolutionary thinkers and you've read the 3 papers that attack Stephen Jay Gould's notion of punctuated equilibria. I don't mean this now in a formal sense. I mean punctuated equilibria as a kind of general sense, meaning there's jumps. We jump from the animal world to the human world. But there's also continuity between those two worlds. So you could tell an entirely different story. What if you told the story, for example, of the history of humanity through the story of the mystery schools, the esoteric mystery schools invoked by shamans and priests and medicine women, right? And people who wanted to become intimate with the whole story and share the story. And people would gather around them and they would tell that love story, right? And that actually, those groups of people actually drove the entire history of reality. What if you told the story that way? All that's left out. So when you finish reading, right, Harari's story, the person who said that stories aren't real and that all stories are fiction, and then he goes and tells us a big story, you get the doublespeak? Actually, his story is a fiction. He's making up a story. And he's telling you this is the story, but it's not. And that's why you get outraged. You get outraged because it's not an intellectual outrage. It matters. You just distorted the whole story. And when you distort the story, there's no intimacy between us. Right? I mean, there's a moment we're desperate. We have a global intimacy disorder. We need global intimacy. So we need to be able to tell a shared story. Does that begin to make sense, everyone? It's like it's deep. It's deep. And you get what I mean, what we said at the beginning? Let's go deeper. Let's repeat and then be utterly original at the same time. That's right. Does that make sense? Okay. So wow. So there's 2 basic moves. That are made in relationship to story. Okay, this is like now part 4. And let's just part share. And I would like to, if you're up for it, everyone, I'd love to do like another week on story next week because we're in the middle of the story. And I don't want to do the second part of the story about story too quickly. But let me just, if I can just set the stage, is that okay? Okay. We've all heard the phrase, get beyond your story, right? Move beyond your story, right? There's no one who hasn't heard that, right? Anyone who's involved in kind of contemporary spiritual teaching, which is not solely within the domain of one kind of orthodox religious practice, if you've got a slightly wider reach. It says, is there anyone in the chat box who has not heard the words, some version of get beyond your story, move beyond your story? Who's heard that? I've heard it many times, right? It's like, right? It's like, we know, right? Move beyond your story, right? So is that right? Let's get in, and this is so deep, because I want to go slow for a second. And we're going to come back to this in our Unique Self 2.0 next 3-week segment that we will do in February. So we talk about 4 selves. It's very core to homomorph, 4 selves. So the first self is separate self. So what's the relationship of separate self to story? So separate self's relationship to story is, my story really matters. It's really important. And that's what I'm thinking about all the time, is my story. And I've got counselors and vocational counselors and therapists and psychologists and And I've told my story to my therapist, a bunch of times. I can always fire them and hire a new one and tell it again. And I'm in my story. That's what I do. I'm in my story. I live in the personal drama of my story. Now stay close. Is that good news or bad news? Well, first, it's really good news, right? Because what the Renaissance said, as we moved from the pre-modern, medieval, and ancient world into the modern world said your story matters. It's a big deal. Like, it's really, the Enlightenment teacher, that's really bad. Well, those are a really big deal. It took us actually at least 10,000 years of contemporary evolutionary history to get to that place where we dignify the story. Anthony Storr is always worth reading. He's wrong half of the time. And Anthony, I can't remember if you're alive or not, but if you are and you happen to be listening, you're wrong half to three-quarters of the time. You're wrong. When you are right, you are so good and you're so smart. And you always just blow my heart open. I've been reading you for 25, 30 years, 40 years, that long. Okay, so you wrote a book, Anthony, called Solitude. And in his book, Solitude, which I read in my early 20s, I believe, right? Which is like 1908, 09, or something like that, right? He writes about the word self. When the word self first appears in the dictionary. You know when it first appears in the dictionary? In the Renaissance. Right? That story, this notion that my story matters, is a big deal. It's a big effing deal. Oriana, that was good, right? Okay. It's a big deal. Story matters is a big deal. It's not like, oh, I'm obsessed with my story. No. To begin to give dignity to my story was a major breakthrough, right? Because the ancient world said only the story of the tribe matters, right? And before the ancient world, only the story of the clan matters. Only my, right? That's the notion that I have, that my individual personal story matters is a big deal, right? Right? And actually, and Anthony Storr he's one of the places he got completely wrong in his book. He says, why is everybody today writing, their own autobiography? It used to be only famous people wrote autobiographies. Only a kind of British intellectual could write that, by the way. Anthony, what were you thinking? Right. The point is that Anthony, you got this? The point is everyone's got an autobiography that matters. You get that? Okay. So we all have a sacred autobiography. Does that make sense? We all have a sacred autobiography. So my story matters. That's a big deal. That's a very big deal. Writing my sacred autobiography is everything. It's telling my story. So separate self is I tell my story. It's very beautiful, right? That's level one. It's a beautiful, momentous leap in evolutionary thought, this beautiful relationship to stories. The only problem with it is I get lost in that story, right? That story becomes not making love to my life. It becomes self-pleasuring, but not in a good way. And there's beautiful self-pleasuring, which is not our topic now, right? There's beautiful self-pleasuring. Then there's also self-pleasuring, which covers up the emptiness. And it's why, by the way, this is funny. There's and please don't offer them up in the chat box. We can pass on that. But there's 10 different words in English language for self-pleasuring, and they're all weird. Right? Again, please don't write them. Thank you. We don't need them all now. And it's a hilarious exercise to collect in all the different languages the words for self-pleasuring. And we don't have a word for it because it's usually to cover over the emptiness. We haven't learned yet the art of self-pleasuring as beauty. And actually, in the mystical lineages, there's this relationship, this description of the divine as generating reality through Shashua. And Shashua is radical joy, but if you trace the philology of the word Shashua carefully through the Zohar and then through later texts with a gentleman named, right, a friend of mine, at least when I was in Israel, I haven't spoken to him since, named Avram El-Kayam did, Shashua is divine self-pleasuring, right? We're used to talking about God creating the world by making love to the world. There's this other notion that in the depth of my own self-pleasuring, I'm creative, right? Right? But that's not our topic. I'm just mentioning that as an aside because my story can become not the beauty of divine self-pleasuring, but it can become one of the 30 words we use, right, for this kind of, furtive, slightly shaming, masturbatory experience that actually leaves us feeling more empty on the other side. Right? And again, most of you don't know what I'm talking about, but if you might have a friend that has familiarity with this and you can discuss it with them. Okay. So that's it's this thing happens in story, which I'm covering up the emptiness. And then I'm just in this recursive loop of a story. I remember when I first, um, led a congregation, I was like 22 years old, and this couple comes to talk to me. I literally can remember it like today. And I was living in a place called Boca Raton, which means rat's mouth, because lots of Jews there, and Jews like to live in places with Spanish names. I don't know why. It's weird. Okay, so I'm there in Boca Raton. I'm actually a rabbi of a congregation. And this couple comes to talk to me. They're telling me about this crazy thing that happened. It's like real, and they're infuriated about it. And I realized about an hour in that it happened like 40 years ago. They're like, I realized they're talking. I thought it happened like last Thursday. And at a certain point, I catch on. No, they've been arguing about this for 40 years, right? You get that? You get stuck in the recursive loop of your story, right? Your story becomes a circle. All my life's a circle, and I can't get out. But it's the circle of my story, which I just can't break out of. And then my life gets very small. And stay with me for a second, friends. Trauma means when one detail, one snippet of that story so engages me that I go into what's called a trauma trance. See Stephen Walensky's 4 volumes on trauma trance, which are quite good. Quite good. Stephen was a good friend of our dear friend Sally Kempton. And Stephen wrote 4 excellent books on trauma trance. Right. So I go into a trauma trance, which means that I narrow, right? If you look at the literature of trauma, right, and Bessel van der Kolk wrote a great book that's getting roundly attacked by the woke world now, but it's a great book nonetheless. Our Body Keeps Score, right? Where he talks about this narrowing of attention that happens in a trauma trance. So what happens is my attention narrows to a particular snippet in my story, so I can't even see or feel the wider expanse of my own story, right? So to stay close, it's so crazy beautiful. So what happens is I'm in my separate self story, but I'm not even in my whole separate self story, right? I'm in this narrow snippet of my separate self story that happened when I was 11 at summer camp. And I keep rerunning that snippet of the story, and I'm traumatized. I'm traumatized, meaning I'm in the feeling of trauma, of the quivering and pain of that moment, and I can't get out of it, and I keep coming back to it, and I can't see anything else, right? Right? And so my separate self, I'm locked in this very narrow story. So on the one hand, there's the evolutionary leap is that's the dignity of story, right? That's its beautiful light. But the shadow is, and I'm trapped in just my story. So I'm exiled from the wider story of the universe into just my story. And then I'm exiled within my story. It's a double exile into one particular snippet of my story, which I keep telling all the time. Does that make sense? So that's the movement that the Enlightened masters from every lineage, it's not an Eastern thing, it's not a Western thing, every lineage said, move beyond your story. That's a critical step. Whoa, move beyond your story, but not move beyond your story where you're obsessed, move beyond your story where you're located in an expectation that wasn't met, lower your expectations, right? Widen your field, right? Feel the wider story, right? Of and the great tradition said, feel the wider story of God, right? They went to the story of God. They went to the divine story. They went to kind of your relationship to God. They went to your obligation, your responsibility, right? Or they went to this experience of enlightenment, right? Your true self. And your true self can be your true self of enlightenment, meaning I move beyond my story and I'm in this timeless time and in this placeless place. And from that place, I rest in the divine embrace. Right? So I'm either resting in the divine embrace because I've got to this religious moment where I'm in the revelation of my religion. I'm resting in my particular Jewish, Christian, Hindu, Muslim divine embrace. Or I'm in a kind of more classical Eastern mystical story or Western mystical where I'm kind of in this timeless time in this placeless place. I've moved beyond my story. Does that make sense? And that's the experience that's described in the Solomon lineage as smolo tachat roshi. Your left hand is under my head. V'yaminot techapkeni, and your right hand embraces me. And I'm resting in this divine embrace, in this timeless time, in this placeless place. I've left the story behind. And you might have a glimmer of that when you watch a sunset, right? Or you just rest in meditation, or you go for a walk in the woods, right? You leave the story behind. Sometimes we go to a movie to get absorbed in someone else's story to leave our story behind. Right? Smolo, smolo, tachat roshi. Right? Your left hand is under my head. V'yamino techakeni. So it's something like this place of leaving the story behind. Smolo, smolo, tachat roshi, v'yamino techakeni. You are resting in this divine embrace, in this timeless time and placeless place. Right? It's a chant. It's not a melody. And if it was a melody, I would have ruined it. But just be in the chant of it, right? Smolo, smolo, tachat roshi v'mino, and techapkeni. Smolo, smolo, tachat roshi v'mino, and techapkeni. And you are resting in this divine embrace, in this timeless time, in this placeless place. And you are resting in this divine embrace, in this timeless time, in this placeless place. Last time. Smolo, smolo, tachat roshi, v'mino, v'mino, and techapkeni. And you are resting in this divine embrace, in this timeless time and placeless place. Right? That's beyond story. Does that make sense, everyone? That's the movement beyond. It's beautiful. And now here's the thing. And here's where it gets so beautiful. That's not the end of the story. The mistake is to make the movement beyond story the end of the story. It's exactly not. It's a step in the story. It's a chapter in the story. Does that make sense? So after I move beyond story, and what happens when I move beyond story, right? This stays. When I move beyond story, I expand my horizon. I access the story of non-story, right? It's the field of being. There's no place to go. There's nothing to do. It's already all good. It's ever, always, already realized, right? I don't have a purpose, right? Remember Zohar? We did it for like a year. We would say to each other in Holy of Holies, why are we doing this? No purpose. Zohar and I would say to each other, maybe it was 8 years ago, why are we doing Holy of Holies? No purpose, just because. Right? We were in the middle, we had been in this middle of deep study of purpose, and we said, no, now no purpose. Why do we do Holy of Holies? No purpose. Why are we doing One Mountain? No purpose. Why are we here together? Just because. It's the highest thing in the world. No, we let the story go. We're just here. So that's the fullness of presence in the radical present, which is the infinity of beingness. Right? Sunset, meditation. Sometimes, I would get it from jogging. I used to jog across Jerusalem twice a day for a number of years. I'd cross Jerusalem one way, then I'd cross Jerusalem the other way, beginning in the end of the day. And I would run. I love to run, right? And then there's a certain moment where you're running and you don't want to be running, and there's you on the pavement and your knees and you're thinking, and there's a certain moment where you're running, and you just, you cross to the other side. You're in. Do you remember that movie? What was it called? Chariots of Fire. Right, about, what was his name? Little, right? The Olympic runner. And he said, and there's this great, our dear friend, Barbara Mark Subbard, Barbara and I used to listen to this clip from Chariots of Fire, right? When he does this famous run at the Olympics. It's a true story. And you just see him, and he becomes the wind, and he becomes the divine. And there's no him, and there's no clothes, and there's no body, and there's no air, and there's no other, and there's no subject, and there's no object. He's the wind. Yeah, that's beyond story. It's not about winning the race. Right? Do you get that? It's like, that's Eros, right? I step into the inside of the inside, and story disappears. It's beautiful. That's what it means to move beyond story. That's real. But then, right, Brother Terry? Then, now that I've got this huge expanse, I've been to the mountaintop. Now I look towards the promised land. And now I step, what emerges out of being is becoming. Whitehead's distinction, right? Now I step back into the story, but not from a place of pettiness and avoidance of peril or avoidance, but I step in from a place of unimaginable potency. I step in not to my petty personality story, separate self. I step into the story of my personhood. And personality is the personality is, if I want to define personality, personality is the psychological, social, and cultural conditioning of my life, and that's all good, right? My personhood is the unique, irreducible quality, right, of Scott Jacksonness, right, of Purimness, right, of Monica-ness, right, that was of David S. Winstonness, right, that was actually intended by Cosmos, right, Cullen in Meritness, right, I was intended by Cosmos, this quality of infinity, incarnate in my unique configuration of intimacy, which is my personhood, was intended by Cosmos herself. That's my unique self story. That's a whole other story. And about that story, I hear the injunction of the divine. Chapter 12, Genesis 1. Ibrahim. Vayomer Adonai el Ibrahim. I'm personally addressed by the infinite intimate. And the infinite intimate says, Lech, go, licha. In English, it's translated, go forth. That's not what it means. Literally not what it means. That's a lie. Lech means go, licha, into the depth of your story. Your unique self story. Because your unique self story emerges out of the field of being, right? Out of the field of being in which you're an irreducibly unique expression, an irreducibly unique feature of the seamless coat of the universe. You are the irreducibly unique story that emerges out of the field of non-story. Now watch this. And story and non-story are one. They're one. And what Ibrahim hears, what Krishna says to Arjuna before the battle, live your dharma. Live your story. Live your story. Live your story. And we're gonna reissue the book Soul Prince. And I think we're gonna title it Live Your Story. Right, one version of it. Live your story. Isn't that right? You get that? It's a command. Live your story. Not your separate self story, not your petty story, not your victim story. Terry, that was for you, right? Not your victim story. Not your victim story. Great exercise that, our dear friend Terry Nelson, my dear friend, Terry's led this exercise for tens of thousands of people around the world. Terry's one of the most brilliant, right, trainers in this deep methodology. And for tens of thousands of people, Terry Nelson, who's here with us, is a dear, dear friend of mine, right, has led tens of thousands of people to move beyond their victim story. Okay? That's absolutely true. But I don't go beyond my victim story to no story. I go beyond my victim story. I then access the field of true self. Those of you who've done the Landmark Forum, that's what happens in the Landmark Forum 101. David, you just did it. Kirsten, I know you did it. That's what happens on Saturday afternoon. You deconstruct all the meaning, which didn't work, and you say, where's the cheese? You go into a place of no story. But then the huge mistake of Landmark, and I'm not just saying this to you, I said it to Werner, who created Landmark, and Werner and I sat for 4 or 5 hours and talked about this a few years ago, and we have a recording of it. I said to Werner, your mistake is, Werner Erhard, who created Landmark, your mistake is that now there's no meaning. The place of non-story means there's no meaning. So now make up any meaning you want and make it beautiful and good. No. We don't invent meaning. We discover meaning. Right? Meaning's there. It's a field of meaning. Now, once you've discovered a field of meaning, you can then originate the next evolution, the deeper, right? You're an original expression of that meaning. So discover your story. Discover your destiny, right? But you're not making it up. You're actually reaching for your original story, to be your original self. Your original self is not, as Buddhism suggests, and they're used to give that term, no story. Your original self is actually the origination that reality invested in your unique quality of intimacy, which is your unique gift and your unique destiny, and your unique quality of intimacy and your unique perspective and your unique incarnation of desire, all of that. So now it's live your story, right? Last step, and we hold. Last step. And then I deepen my relationship to story. I go to evolutionary unique self. And I'm like, my story is not just I'm a unique expression of the field, but I'm a unique pulsing, I'm a unique throbbing, I am the personal face of the evolutionary impulse itself. Right? And my story is now much wider. And this is Yuval's mistake back in Sapiens. He cuts himself off from the evolutionary impulse, meaning the whole evolutionary impulse that basically births the whole world of matter and then the whole world of the biosphere. That's all not, no, that's all not part of the story. No, there's an evolutionary impulse, which is pulsing through all of reality. And to awaken at evolutionary unique self is to realize that the evolutionary impulse is personally pulsing through the plot lines of reality uniquely manifest in my original story. And that's what we mean when we say your story is chapter and verse in the universal love story. Okay, last step, and we're done. So here's where it gets crazy. So that means that to be enlightened is to get the story right. It's not just multiple perspectives. Yes, the first step is, let me do some Marshall Rosenberg. Good job, Marshall. Nonviolent communication, great idea. I'm not going to tell you my perspective. Let me listen to what you're saying. Let me echo back to what you're saying, right? Right? Like, you can't do this in California. You can't even eat a meal in California, by the way. Like, could you pass the salt? What I hear you saying is that you'd like the salt. Just pass the fucking salt. Sorry, Ariana. Oop, sorry. Right? So in others, there's something funny about nonviolent communication, but it's actually great. It's actually a great contribution. It's a beautiful contribution. And in general, the great critics of liberalism today forget that liberalism, and I'm one of them, liberalism made really important contributions. And Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication is one of them. It's really good, actually. Like, stop fighting separate self-fighting stories. Let me hear what you're saying. Let me step out of my story. Let me hear you. Let me hear what your desire is. Beautiful. But then after I've heard you, and now I've got to now establish, okay, right, what's the deeper truth here? What's the deeper truth? And the deeper truth might be me realizing that my story is more accurate than yours, or it also might be me giving up part of my story, which was actually a cover-up for my own sense of emptiness or fear or loneliness. Actually, I might get real tight on a call when I get critiqued because, like, oh my God, I'm losing my identity. No, I can relax into yourself. I'm good. I'm welcome. Then I step into my unique self story. And then I realize that my story is part of the larger story of evolution. And now let's bring all that together. Now, when I'm now in relationship to reality, when I'm in a conversation, I got to get the story straight. Enlightenment means the most accurate and honest and deepest view of what actually the storyline is, what actually happened. And I know sometimes even people that I'm very close with, when I start telling them about the think tank, about details of the story, they're like, their eyes glaze. Like, really? Let's talk about like the Dharma. No, but it's a story. There's people in the story, and there's pain, and there's beauty, and there's potency, and there's poignancy, right? Our lives are stories. God loves stories. Reality is stories. Mathematics is a story. Number is a story, and story is a story. They're both forms of story, right? So to be in the story, to feel each other in the story. That's what intimacy means. Intimacy means I can feel what it's like to be in your story. And one of the highest practices I've ever been privileged to do, sometimes in Holy of Holies, is to just sit quietly and literally actually sit with someone And it's, you got to go like, just switch places. I'm not going to be me anymore. I'm going to be you. I'm just going to try and feel the mirroring through your story. I'm your age. The world's looking at me like they look at you. And I have both your gifts and your complexities. And I begin to experience myself as you. I can actually feel your story. That's intimacy. That's what intimacy means. That's why the nature of the infinite intimate, we call God the infinite intimate, because she lives my story with me. And I never live my story alone. Right? And that's what that crazy story, which is a Hasidic story that went apocryphal in the human potential movement, is trying to say. And you all know the story I'm referring to, right? Footprints on the beach. Right? So I'm walking and I see this pair of footprints right next to me because God's always right next to me. And I get in trouble. There's only one set of footprints. Where did God go? I got abandoned. And then I realize, I hear a voice that says, no, I'm carrying you. One set of footprints, divine footprints, I'm carrying you. That's unique self. That's evolutionary unique self. But we have to be willing to get the story straight. Right? We don't have to agree on everything, but we have to actually be able to work through the story. We don't run away from the story. We always have to work it through, to rest in it. I got to feel your feeling of the story. Even if you're wrong, you got to feel my feeling. And then we have to actually take these different perspectives and check them against all of the barometers of truth. What actually happened? Let's check. Let's go back and forth. That's actually all of modern Western liberalism is that. That's why we say a person's innocent until proven guilty. Let's check the story. We gather evidence. We establish the storyline. It's huge. It's huge. It's true for the individual person. It's true for nations. It's true for religions. Okay. There's a lot more to say, but that just exhausted me. So let's hold here. But we went. Did we get someplace here, friends? It's like, wow, right? It's like, wow. Like, wow. Right? Right, David? Yeah? Okay. Okay. So it's 2:32. I'm sure there's only like 3 people here. But if there's 3 people left, we're going to do one thing for the last 2 minutes. We're going to light Hanukkah candles. So I just want to remember one thing, our last word, right? Oh, that's right, David. David recognized it's Zach Slater. That's correct. You remember we lit together. We're gonna light together again on the 8th night, and that's the 7th day and 8th night of Hanukkah, which is whatever day. Christy will tell us what day that is. It's a few days. But when we lit together the first night of Hanukkah, we noticed that the actual historical story that in this Hebrew wisdom tradition of Hanukkah, which takes place 160 years before the Common Era, there's these 5 Maccabee brothers, and there's this great rebellion against Hellenism, this kind of denial of the intrinsic value structure of cosmos. And the Maccabee brothers stand for value is real in cosmos. That's really what it was about in some deep way. So the only thing is that the Hanukkah story is told to everyone as this great victory. The only problem is that they lost. That's right. They won the first few battles, like 20 years. And then the Greek Seleucids obviously had, huge superior forces. All 4 of the 5 Maccabee brothers were killed. They went out into the next world, and our deeds in this world echo in eternity. Gladiator got that right. Gladiator 2, or Sing, right? So they lost. But here's the thing. We said then at the beginning, I just want to say it again. We celebrate partial victories, right? And when I decide to celebrate the partial victory of my life, and that's how I tell the story, then my life becomes a triumph. And I have not seen walking around any place in Vermont or Israel or, Europe, any place I've been, I have not seen any Greek Seleucids the last couple of years. There's not a lot of Greek Seleucids around. But those same Hebrew wisdom people are lighting those same candles because they told a story of triumph. They told a story of victory, right? Not because they were making it up, not because they were bypassing, but actually they understood that life is partial victories. To be able to live in the joy of a partial victory, wow. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu le'adlik ner shel Chanukah. The second blessing is for the infinite intimate who makes miracles, made miracles then, and makes miracles now. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim la'avoteinu bayamim ahem ba'azman hazeh ma'osor Yeshuati l'chanai l'shameach Ikon betefilati v'sham toda nezabeach liyitzachin mateach mitzaram nabeach awawazek mor b'shir mizmor v'chanukat mizbeach Yawawazek mor b'shir mizmor Chanukat mizbeach Barim bam bim barim nai nai Rim barim nai nai Rim barim oh oh Rim barim nai nai Rim barim nai 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 Rim nai 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 Nimmarana, hey, arana, ilarana, hey, 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 Arimarana, inarana, inarana, hey, Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. Happy New Year. Krista, take us home, love. Yay. A little bit of light.
Christmas.
Dispels a lot of darkness. Cha.
A little bit of light dispels a lot of darkness. Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Marc Gafni. That was a wild, beautiful, beautiful, deep journey. There's a huge invitation to step into this work, into this revolution. As we always say, this is a bottom-up revolution. It is a unique self-symphony. And literally, each and every one of us here is needed to play your unique instrument in this unique self-symphony. And literally, if you don't begin to play your instrument, it's actually not going to happen. So it's like all of reality is waiting for you to say yes, to dance your dance, to sing your song, to live your story, as Marc spoke about so beautifully today. So let's feel into what is your unique story. And I actually had a beautiful not a conversation yet, but Marc actually invited Eli to write a vision for himself, but also for the Center for World Philosophy and Religion and his role in the center, not for 1 year, not for 3 years, not for 5 years, but for 20 years, for 50 years. And that's the commitment actually that we have here together. Like, who can we be together 20 years from now? And I thought that was such a beautiful invitation and such a beautiful holy practice, actually. So I wanted to encourage everyone to maybe take a piece of paper this week and write down, like, what is your vision for the Center for World Philosophy and Religion, and where do you want to play your instrument? And Marc spoke about it earlier in this broadcast today, that we are working on a lot of projects, but 2 very big projects here in One Mountain Many Paths. And the first one is that we are publishing all the weekly episodes for One Mountain Many Paths. We're taking the recording, we're transcribing them, we're editing them, and then we're publishing those into books. And we're working with an amazing group of people. And we got this far that actually we have the episodes edited, and now we're compiling them and putting them into books. And we need help with that. Like, we need people that are willing to step in as a final reader of those books, but also we need to hire a couple of freelance professionals like proofreaders, like designers, like indexers to work on the final stages of those books. And it's really, 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 really helpful if we get a little bit more resources to do that. Our devotion, radical, powerful goal and intention is to get these books out before the next board retreat, which is in June next year. So we're all working really hard. It's all hands on deck. And if you can help, that is super much appreciated. So thank you. I will put my email in the chat box if you want to talk about how you can step in, what you see as your unique role in the symphony. Please do reach out, and I would love to talk to you.